And the first week's topic is transportation.
Caught in the crossfire.
You know, I remember fondly growing up that it would actually be a real question if the vehicle was a manual or an automatic transmission. And I guess by proxy, being sort of the theft deterrent for most people not knowing how to use a clutch. It's rare that you see manual transmissions anymore, unless it's a sports or a race car, in which, if you know, you know. It seemed like most vehicles as a kid were large boats of cars. For example, the wheelbase of a 92 Cutlass Supreme was actually over 40 feet, and the wheelbase of a Tesla Model 3 is only 15.5 feet. The seats in older cars were often like couches. It's very rare, if not ever, to see detailed vehicles anymore as such. As a youngster in high school, I worked at a GM dealership. I washed and detailed cars, and even did a co-op as a mechanic. Working almost full-time hours while being in high school, I remember listening to full rock albums, learning about the difference between 10W30 oil and 10W40, and the variance in viscosity and difference, understanding what it meant to do a service tire rotation, and what a rear differential is, checking oil, fluids, belts, and seeing how cylinders worked. While still 20 years have passed, it still seems like a skill to me that seems like riding a bike, in that I wouldn't be able to forget something like that. You know, it's interesting because a short bit about electric vehicles. The fastest Tesla does 0 to 60 miles an hour in 1.9 seconds. It's extremely quick. A $100,000 car will do 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds on average. The cost of gas when I was growing up was 48 cents a liter. It's now over $1.45 a liter. And in my opinion, we're coming to the end of fossil fuel. Apparently the world's reserves will run out in 30 to 50 years. And I actually believe that. I guess maybe run out is a harsh phrase, but it will definitely be economically unfeasible. Beyond the automotive industry, I often think about the TTC in Toronto and public transportation in general, largely because I used it daily for a decade. Comprised of streetcars and subways, I think mostly people would be really stumped at how complicated these systems are. Not specifically thinking about the streetcar or subway, but the infrastructure that's required to use it. I can remember a dozen times at the Bathurst or Spadina station, waiting for the subway to go to work, and there is a line that's around the block. I once experienced a subway that had track level issues, and over 400,000 people were on the street trying to flag Ubers, and what would normally cost $15 was now $200 due to surge pricing. This is in fondness to think about the TTC. I was standing beside a man yesterday that looked at his phone and realized the bus was coming in 4 minutes, and he let out a sigh. Can you believe this shit? While I'd lived in Toronto for over 10 years, I saw some major upgrades to the transit system, including air conditioning on subway carts. Pre-2010, if you hopped into a non-air conditioned cart, it was a nightmare while wearing a collared shirt. People would hop carts between stops to find that one that was air conditioned. In the heat of the summer, it really mattered when you were underground, and it was push and shove, shoulder to shoulder. In one job that I absolutely loved, I commuted over 1 hour and 20 minutes each way to work, requiring a streetcar to subway to transfer to a 15-minute walk to work each day. One way. I still have dozens and dozens of Subway Pass cards that cost over $125 a month. For over a decade, I spent over an hour, almost 1.5 hours each way using the TTC to get to work, which required being underground for a large portion of it, which eventually you actually normalize. The station locations, the monthly swipe cards, the transfers, the east and west platforms, the various shop owners, and vendor stations serving everything from samosas to coffee to gum to Tide Pen to go. I am now going to read a submission from someone named Emily who submitted 4 commute times. It was titled A Commute from Hell. It was a Monday morning, and I had already hit the snooze button twice before reluctantly dragging myself out of bed. I stumbled through my morning routine, and the thought of facing another long commute to work, thinking of all the stops and transfers I need to make. Little did I know that today's journey would be different. Living in the suburbs and working in the heart of the city, it's an hour-long commute on a good day. I hurried to catch the early train, hoping to avoid the rush hour crowds. But as I arrived to the station, I was met with chaos. A sea of frustrated commuters filled the platform, anxiously checking their watches and frantically emailing work, trying to make calls on their phone. After the fact, it was clear that most people were trying to do the same thing, so it ended up being okay for the majority of the city. It's not like it was one person in one situation. The entire city was dealing with it. Emily quoted that the first sign of trouble came in from an announcement crackling over the PA system. Due to unforeseen track maintenance, all trains are delayed indefinitely. We apologize for the inconvenience. I felt my heart sink as I realized that I was in for a long wait. As minutes turned into hours, the station became increasingly crowded and chaotic. Tempers flared and arguments broke out. It was as if the anger group somehow selected someone to be the public communicator for the masses, for everyone who didn't know what was going on. All you can do is watch helplessly as the morning sun rose higher into the sky and as the day continues. Finally, trains pulled into the station. City buses were dispatched as express buses ran, but the relief was short-lived as you and everyone else in the city are shoved into an overcrowded carriage, squeezed between strangers struggling to find a foothold as the system resumed. Emily. Moving into the second segment, diving into the psychology of commuting. Studies have shown that long commute times can have a significant impact on our mental health and overall well-being. The stress of navigating traffic or the monotony of a long train ride can contribute to the feelings of anxiety, frustration, and burnout. But it's not just the duration of the commute that matters, it's also the quality of the experience. For some, the commute is a welcome opportunity to unwind, listen to music, or catch up on a good book. For others, it's a source of dread and resentment. So what determines how we perceive our commute? Does it boil down to the good old question of, did this deviate from my expectations of what was intended? And were there any deviations to this? To quote the comedian Louis C.K. on flying, everything is amazing and nobody is happy. Flying is the worst because people come back from flights and they often tell you a horror story, as it was the worst day of their life, beginning with, first of all, we didn't board for 20 minutes, and then we sat there for a while on the runway. The crux of the joke is that it should be considered much more of a miracle in that you're flying. You're sitting in a chair in the sky that 100 years ago would have been impossible. In my opinion, we get so incredibly used to the idea. In segment 3, I wanted to talk about the impact on society. Beyond the individual level, commute times also have a far-reaching implication for society as a whole. Urban planners, policymakers, and businesses must grapple with the challenges of traffic congestion, air pollution, and equitable access to transportation. The rise of remote work and flexible scheduling has sparked a reevaluation of traditional commuting patterns, leading to discussions about the future of transportation and urban development. Living in Toronto and working downtown for over a decade, I remember when the King Streetcar pilot program was installed. This was just pre-pandemic. The issue was that the city was very east and west heavy as it was situated and built north of Lake Ontario, and a lot of commuters have had to travel far from either side via streetcar or subway. They made a shift where King Street, which was arguably one of the biggest veins in Toronto for streetcars and 9-to-5 workers. Carts were only allowed to be on King Street for one block and would have to turn off to reduce congestion for the streetcars from it being caught in traffic and hindering people getting to work on time. It actually seemed to work really well. It was tested in 2017 and made permanent in 2019 as it increased daily ridership by 16%, among other benefits. I think this is a great example of how discussion, research, and implementation affected urban development. There are a million and one things to discuss here, from cyclists to electric bikes to e-vehicles to ride-sharing economy to traditional gas vehicles and public transportation. In reality, and largely in my own opinion, we are very fortunate to have access ultimately to all these avenues of commuting options, and likely deserves a second episode where we can dive into the economics of this. In segment 4, which outlines navigating the future, and as we wrap up our exploration of commute times, I invite you to reflect on your own commute experiences. What does your daily commute look like, and how does it shape your day-to-day life? What changes would you like to see in our transportation systems? And how can we work together to create a more equitable and sustainable future? In digression, thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope you'll tune in next time as we continue to explore the fascinating intersections of technology and culture and human experience. Until then, safe travels and may your commute be filled with moments of inspiration.
Caught in the crossfire.